This is a how do you do video for Airik's Knife Life. I found his channel recently and I thought it was great. And his name is very similar to mine. I'm Airik, E-R-I-K. He is A-I-R-I-K. And he clearly loves knives and enjoys using them and working on them. And so it did occur to me that he would be an ideal candidate for my knife reviewers challenge, wherein I challenge a knife reviewer to specify within a list of parameters a knife that they would like me to make for them. And then I make that knife for them in exchange for a coin of the realm, any monetary value, and their commitment to test and critically review the product. Not really an entirely original idea in how it works out. This is what a lot of knife makers do. So I don't know why I felt like it was such a bright and original notion when it occurred to me. But it did, and I put the idea out there. I contacted a few knife reviewers, and one of them so far accepted the challenge, Captain Electro. I made him a 3-inch Warncliffe, and I have videos on that, and he has some videos on that. And that has been a lot of fun for me and educational, and so a success. And I would like to make another one of these chisel knives, and I have a load roughed out. This is the one that is the closest to being a complete knife, let's say. I mean, it really is a complete knife, just with a very funny handle on it. And still a fairly steep bevel on the Scandivex. But that, of course, could be preferable depending on the user. Not sure whether we'll see any signs of carbide hammering on the blade, but you can see there on the tang where I've done some straightening. So let me just grab one of these chisels in an original condition. It's got some Sharpie on it, but this would be a 3/8 inch width, and they made them in 1 inch, 3/8 and a half. So I also, let me grab a handful of other examples. These are very rough. So I've taken a chisel, which the chisel is never straight. But it's because of the way they've made it, it's basically a very nice piece of knife stock for making a stick tang or a 3/4 tang, I would say, knife. It's a vintage steel. It's a mystery steel at this point. I think it is a semi-stainless by how it certainly does rust, but it doesn't rust as easily as the high carbon steels that I've become used to on pocket knives and things like that. So I think it's some kind of tool steel with the original 1980s Stanley heat treatment. So it's a kind of an ideal starting point for a novice knife maker like me. I don't have to worry about heat treatment. I've basically got a billet here that I can do whatever I like with, slowly and surely. So anyway, back to the point. That would be a sheep's foot, a pruner, kind of a hawkbill pruner. Not quite enough width to do a really good hawkbill on the 1 inch, but I calculated and I kind of got the most out of it. And then there's a similar one, which is a ram's foot, just doesn't have the recurve. It's a little different. And I think that this could be a very interesting and fun bushcraft knife with a kind of a Scandivex / Sabervex, or perhaps just a full convex, but quite a bulbous one. And it could be fun. a Warncliffe, and a lamb's foot. So this was just to see whether I could, capture your imagination a little bit, and this is available, and so this could be sent to you as a complete knife. Would take maybe a couple of weeks, or since I noticed that you like doing handling, putting handles on knives, alternately, you could possibly put a handle on it yourself. And there would be various ways of doing that. One way would be for me to grind this. From here, it turns into a stick, kind of like a typical stick tang. There are right angles there, and then a fairly thin piece of stock that comes down to about here, and there's a hole in it there that a pin can go through. So yeah, one way would be to just grind that down and then make it into a stick tang knife, and that would be a very nice knife, I believe, and very nicely balanced. My objection to doing it that way, and the reason why on the 2 chisel knives that I made so far I haven't done it that way. Oh, there's a fly. I don't have a chisel knife to show you. They're gone. But here is a knife made with a straight razor that uses exactly the same construction method as the chisel knives that I made. Minus that the chisel knives I made also had pins in them. This is not pinned, it's only epoxied. So here's another straight razor. This one is fairly unremarkable to my mind. It was a very delicate, hollow ground straight razor that's seen better days. And you can make an excellent little whittling knife with these. I've made a few. But this was a straight razor that my friend Vinny gave me. He's a knife maker and a blacksmith, and when I told him about what I was doing, making knives using old straight razors, he produced this one for me that I think may be 200 years old. It's a very unusual shape to it. It did. I have a photo of I believe, of the tang stamp, but I couldn't tell you what the name was on it. But it was a name that I think I looked it up and I couldn't find it. So I think it's an old English maker, maybe 200 years old. And you can see where I flattened out the hollow grind a little bit. But to the best of my recollection, this sway was already here. And so all I did was clip the point. And it needed very little work. Now, some of the straight razor knives that I've made have a lot of work put into the blade, but this one was a very simple matter, really, to get this blade to excellent. You could just tell by looking at it that is very sturdy and very slicey. And it has a compound distal taper. It widens out here and then it slims in back there, which I see on pocket knife clip points at least a fair amount, actually. So this is a clamshell handle. I slid the collars on first. You have buffalo horn and celluloid. It's a shame this isn't polished up. It's very matte looking, so you don't really get the full glory of the cherry burl. But I have images of other knives that I've made on my channel. The Buck Pursuit is a good one to look at how the handle came out on that. You look at the last video I made, I think it was, about the Buck Pursuit. You see how this cherry burl, once you polish it up and everything, it really pops. So I can offer handle materials back here behind the Brisa Big Muck. Maybe I can focus in and you can see the little examples that I put up there. How they're drying out. I wet them so they would look good. But anyway, there's oak burl on the left and cherry burl on the right. and lilac wood in the foreground. Lilac wood is very strong, so I use that for making pins. And it also has this purple, comes out in the grain. So you can make these pins with little purple elements in them that are also very strong, which is nice. Now, I don't know whether Airik would want to make a clamshell handle like this, or whether he might want to make a simple stick tang. Well, I don't know whether he might want to make a Stanley chisel knife, or indeed want me to make one for him complete. I mean, either is on offer. But for me, it's kind of cool, the idea of not having to make the handle, just make the blade blank and supply that. But since, to my mind, so I was kind of explaining this. So when I made the tang would have been a very similar size. You could see that the whole thing was much stockier on the blade end. But the tang did much the same thing. And you can see thereby how I was able to fit probably the entire tang in there. I'm pretty sure I did, because this tang, like this one, usually they have a big old shoulder here on the straight razors, and this one absolutely did not have that. So it was a very good one and a very easy one for making a knife. So you can imagine that with all of that thickness enclosed, with the irregular shape of it, it has this part here, so there's no way you can pull the blade out, for example. Even if you stick it in a vise and crank on it as hard, you'd just explode the handle if you had a means to pull on it hard enough. And similarly, so it will handle in between a stick tang and a full tang. So I call it a 3/4 tang. I mean, that might technically be something else, or it could be various things. But I'm saying if you can save as much of this, which depending on how you make the blade. So for example, on this one, in order to fit the handle, a lot of this would come off here, these shoulders. But on this blade, you wouldn't have to take off that much of these shoulders. You could possibly, depending on the handle, if you wanted a very typical kind of bushcrafty oval handle, you could get the whole thing in there. And then I'm telling you, that is not even twice as strong, maybe 3 or 4 times as strong overall. Strong being obviously a little subjective, right? But it will be a lot stronger design, and you can put a pin through here as well and get 1-2 pins. You could put more pins in, but I wouldn't see why you would bother to do that. And so then I did have another idea, since the knife that I saw, Airik rehandled a Brisa and did a beautiful job. Absolutely beautiful. I mean, look at this Brisa handle from the factory. But his was next level. So a third option that I thought of would be that I could supply a sort of a semi-made knife wherein I make a kind of a false tang enclosure for the tang using perhaps lilac wood, because it's very strong. And so I would make that as thin as possible in this profile. And in this profile, I would leave it something like a big old trapezoid, right? 4 sides, but, also this could be specified depending on what handle shape you want. But I'm just thinking, well, if I just leave it like that, it's easy because it's wood. It's easy to get it down to the shape you want. So you could just stick handle scales supplied by me or your favorite supplier. Just stick them straight on there and pin them to this wood, around the tang, and do it that way. And I think that would be a very interesting project, like a collaboration. And it would be an excellent knife, because you would have a very well reinforced, strong, sturdy tang area. Well, excellent in certain regards. It's not a super steel. I can't do crisp work. Yeah, not how I work, because I work with hand stuff mainly. This has seen a tiny belt grinder and a wheel, but most of what that's roughing out, and most of what you see is just hand. And so now I'm looking at this, I'm also thinking, well, there's the question of finish, right? That would be also bespoke, right? So if you like this finish, you can have it. But if you like a mirror polish, a satin finish, or a forced patina, which can come out very nicely with this metal, it comes out a kind of a gray, a very kind of mute, light gray color. Yeah, all of that would be up to the reviewer. I know I'm jumping back and forth a lot, and so I've muddled myself up terribly now. And also, I tried to make this video last night, and I think I did 7 takes before I realized I was just too tired, and it wasn't going to happen. So I've introduced myself. I'm Airik. I'm a novice knife maker, expert in absolutely nothing. I have some limited expertise in various things. I like music. I play the guitar. I have a knife reviewers channel. Challenge. There's an interesting story about the knife reviewers challenge because I've been, since I started posting videos in YouTube a couple of months ago, prior to which I had an account for years and was always active in the comments section since I made my account. I started posting content, and I started, trying to maybe grift a little bit out there, but, be delicate about it, not just come into a brand new stranger's channel like Airik and say, hey, you got to come and check out my channel because da-da-da, but, leave a comment, see what they say, see whether there's some feeling and so forth. And so with a few different reviewers, I made this offer, and in fact, it got to the point where my predictive texting, if I put the word exchange, right? Once I put the words in exchange, then the predictive texting would put all the following sequence for me, which is in exchange for a coin of the realm and your commitment to test and critically review my work. Because that's the deal, yeah. And it got to a point where I thought, well, maybe I'm just paranoid, but it seems to me that every time I use that sequence of words, that comment doesn't get a response. And so I left a comment with that sequence, which is where I discovered the predictive texting thing, right? I left the comment on Airik's channel because we were having a kind of a banter. There had been a couple of comments back and forth already. And so then I said, you know what, I'm gonna make him this offer. And then he didn't get the comment. I sent him another comment saying, did you get that comment? And he said, no, didn't get it. But he got the question, right? And we've communicated since then. So I asked whether I could make a video for him and then tag him in the description. And he gave me his blessing to do that. So that brings us, back to the present. What am I doing here? I think I've probably outlined the proposal, 3-inch maximum, any profile, any grind. I'll give it my best shot. Yeah? And I'm an amateur, so it's not going to be that great. But I think they're good. They cut well, in my opinion, and they sharpen very easily. And that stands to reason because Stanley, USA, in the 1980s, must have made 1 million of these things. And you figure they knew what they were doing. They were making a woodworking tool for the domestic market. And so they picked a steel and they gave it the right heat treatment. That's my guess, right? And so far, to my mind, has been confirmed. Captain Electro's review is interesting. And hopefully he'll be doing some more reviews so you can see what he thinks about it, instead of me just being full of hot air and saying whatever. I thought it would be interesting to take a look at this William Collins knife because, Airik, if you're not familiar with William Collins, you might want to look into him. He does very interesting knives. Very interesting. And so this one he put up for sale recently, something by way of a one-off, I believe. And I thought, wow, I got to snap that up. A Sloyd knife with a distal taper that compounds the final bevel, right? Because, so you see this amazing smile it's got going on there, because the angle is constant, but there is a taper. So I snapped that up and I tried it out, including on a piece of stag. It worked very well on that. But then when I got this one out, I was looking for this one to show Airik in particular, although I had a shoebox, or a cigar box rather, with all of these guys and some more. But yeah, this one, once I got it, I realized, well, because I pay attention to what William Collins does. Wouldn't like to say that I rip him off, but I suppose you could make a case. So I was doing kind of the same thing on this knife. It has a distal taper. I'm working on it. I mean, the taper is not very perceptible around this area, so it's way more robust. It's stockier. But there is something by a way of a distal taper, and that is perceptible then in the way that the final bevel sort of tightens up a little bit up to the point here. And so that will give a different cutting performance, obviously, and it's a good effect.